Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whoever you are, wherever you are. This is Dr. Patrick Lockwood coming back to you with my good friend, Iona. And hopefully she'll do a great job of explaining who she is. I don't know if she will. And then she'll tell us a little bit about her latest projects and why we're having a conversation today about new forms of social media that might be able to help us have better dialogue and better relationships. So, Iona, take it away. Tell us who you are, what you're doing, and what's going on with Letter.
Sure. So my name is Iona Italia, Dr. Iona Italia, since we seem to be on tight terms here. And I am Indian Parsi is my ethnic background, but I'm an Argentine citizen, and I'm coming to you here from Buenos Aires. And my work is, I work as the sub-editor of a political and social commentary magazine, online magazine called Areo magazine, A-R-E-O. And I have my own podcast also called Two for Tea. But the other project that I'm involved in, which I want to talk more about today, is a new platform / website called Letter, www.letter.wiki. And I used to be a professional tango dancer. In my life, I began as an academic, and then for 10 years I was a professional dancer.
Okay.
And now I am 50. I also have a bad dance injury, and I've sort of semi-retired from dancing, and now I work on trying to improve the public dialogue in general, and I'm a writer.
Great. So you wear many hats, you have many skills apparently, and it's really cool that you're part of these two giant platforms that are growing and getting a lot of popularity and kind of bringing in a bunch of different kinds of minds. Different kinds of people seem to be on these platforms like Areo and Letter Wiki, it seems like. So why don't you explain for those of my viewers who don't know what Letter Wiki is, what its purpose is, who started it, and where you guys are heading.
So Letter was founded by these two Australian brothers, Dane and Clyde Rathbone. And Dane was a stand-up comic. He describes himself rather succinctly in his Twitter bio as former loser, now the founder of Letter Wiki. We're all former losers at this company, now turning around and becoming winners.
Exactly.
His brother Clyde, his older brother Clyde, who was a professional rugby player. Oh. So Clyde and I are both kind of retired formerly physical people who are now doing more cerebral mental stuff.
Yeah.
And then there are my colleagues, Ryan, our IT guy, and Jackson and Peter, who do reach out. And we also have a bunch of people working for us on just for a few hours per month who are matchmakers. Or we call them mimetic mediators. So one of the things we do at Letter is if you want to write a letter to somebody and you don't have anyone to write to, we try and find a correspondent for you. That's what our mimetic mediators do. It's a kind of OkCupid it's a kind of intellectual version of OkCupid.
Wow. So just to back it up just a little bit for anyone who might not have heard of the website or etc., how exactly does Letter work?
So Letter is a public one-on-one platform for letter writing. So what you do when you go onto the platform, you sign up and you can read, in fact, anyone can read the letters that are the letter exchanges that are already going on there. Mm-hmm. And if you want to have a letter exchange, you can either write to somebody who is with you and you will have your exchange of letters together there publicly. Or if you have a topic you want to write about but you don't have a correspondent, then we have a letter in a bottle feature. So if you write in a bottle, that will go out to our mimetic mediators team, and we will find the right person to answer that letter.
So, so basically, it's like old style, like for you and I, old school letter writing, where you actually, well, even though we're not using physical pens and paper, it's people who literally draft a letter of multiple pages, online pages, and then it's sent to some person, and then they read it, and it takes maybe days or hours, it's at probably days, for them to get back to them and write multiple pages of a letter. It's just in electronic form.
That's right. It's a little short. They're a little shorter generally than kind of multiple page letters. It's maybe one decent, generous page length. Most of our letters
Okay.
around. So most of our letters are capped at 1,000 words. Although sometimes people, if they want to just send several letters at once, if they want
Mm,
to more expansively,
mm,
and it's the difference from from other social media is that there's no, you can read people's letter exchanges, but you can't like, you can't comment, you can't interject. So when you're on the platform, when you log on and you find the person you want to write to and you click on their name, and then the screen appears, a blank screen, and it prompts you to write dear whoever. And then you begin writing, and there's nothing else there at that moment whilst you're writing. You're just focusing on writing
mm-hmm,
to that person,
mm-hmm,
and then you click send. And when the person has replied to you, when the person then gets an email
mm-hmm,
saying that they have a letter and giving them the link, and they click the link, go onto the site, and then they can reply to your letter.
mm-hmm,
And once they press reply, you get an email saying that they've replied,
mm-hmm.
and the conversation works.
Okay. And I noticed that in some of the letters I've read, that people actually link things. They add links and references to things so that people who are writing can be more informed about whatever topic it is they're discussing or debating.
Sure, you can put in links, you can add pictures.
Huh.
I think later we're going to allow you to embed video. And we
Wow.
sort of outsource the comment section to Twitter, and now also to Facebook.
No.
So you can share your letter exchange on Twitter or Facebook, and there on Twitter and Facebook, people can comment and you can have a more general discussion. On the platform itself, there's no comment function. It's just you and your correspondent. If you want to read the other things that are on the platform,
Mm-hmm.
you can also do that. You just go to our homepage, and we have a featured conversations
Mm,
function for the 10 best conversations of the week
mm,
that we've selected.
mm,
Um, and you can read through those conversations. And if you want to discuss those conversations further on social media, you can click on the little Twitter button or Facebook button, and it will show you all of the people who have shared that conversation and everything they've said on Twitter about it.
interesting.
You will see all the tweets and Twitter discussion, so that you can join in any discussion about it that you want to but not on the platform itself. So we allow Twitter to do our dirty work for us, and we outsource
Nice.
sections there.
Yeah, I would assume, and I could be wrong, but I would assume that it's actually a lot easier for people to have a more in-depth, serious conversation when it doesn't seem like there are thousands or hundreds of thousands of onlookers commenting, liking, and sharing. You can probably have a more fluid conversation with someone when there's not the distraction of a like button, and there's not the distraction of people commenting and sharing and gifting and things of that nature in your direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what do we do when we want to have a serious, in-depth conversation with someone, and
Right.
we're really interested in hearing their views on communicating?
Yeah.
We have a podcast, which is basically a conversation, one-on-one conversation,
Right.
or we write them an email, um, or we talk to them in real life, or we phone them, we Skype with them. whatever else it might be. But when we want to talk to somebody seriously, when we really want to get into the weeds of a topic, explore it together, or when we want to be able to talk through a disagreement calmly and civilly, we do it one-on-one. We don't go out into a public place and allow everybody to spectate and put in their 2 cents as we're going along. And that's what happened. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah. So it sounds like this is kind of a civility mechanism. This is a new social media platform that can allow people to actually engage in civil dialogue, as opposed to these other platforms that are just kind of dopamine driven, where you automatically respond, you automatically like, you automatically attack someone, you automatically send 280 characters of vitriol their direction. You really can't do that here.
You can't. Well, Twitter in particular has this gladiatorial feeling.
It does.
Twitter is a lek. It's everybody displaying their feathers.
Yeah.
And it's really, whenever you're writing on Twitter, you're writing for an audience of, usually you're writing for an audience of your own followers.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's very tempting to say the things that you know will get you applause from your followers.
Sure.
Make the comment that you know will be the most, will satisfy them the most, will get you all the likes. And the same is true of Facebook. On Facebook, things can get even more toxic than on Twitter, because it often involves people you know in real life. And I've seen real life friendships end on Facebook. And so I've stopped using Facebook for these kinds of more delicate conversations. For the reason. But on both Twitter and Facebook, you're speaking maybe to another person, but you're speaking also to an audience at the same time, and that influences how you speak to them. It feels more like a debate chamber. It makes you more inclined to try to score points.
Right.
Where when you're writing a letter, for one thing, we encourage people to get permission first before writing. And so you have to make the person feel they actually want to write to you, to have this conversation. And you need to write to them in such a way that they will be inspired to respond and want to respond.
Sure.
And therefore, you can't just do drive-by snark at them.
Sure.
They're not going to respond to that. I mean, in a sense, you can. You're not constrained. You're not forced to write in any particular way, but you're really nudged in a direction of greater civility.
Interesting. So this platform really does focus on civility, impulse control, open discourse, thoughtful debate, things of that nature. It's kind of the inverse of Twitter, essentially. It's slower, it's less kind of primitive in terms of how it activates us, and it's more, let's say, civil. And I think that's badly needed nowadays. Why is this not a billion-dollar company?
That's a good question. Hopefully, from your lips to Ahura Mazda's ear, hopefully we will achieve world domination and become a billion-dollar company.
Yeah.
And absolutely everybody will be on Letter. I think so. There is a civility aspect, but I don't think that civility on its own is all that useful. So we often use civility to just avoid difficult conversations.
Sure.
In fact, one of the letter exchanges I'm having with Buster Benson, and an ongoing conversation I'm also having with Aaron Rubinovich, is the kind of limitations of civility. So Buster says that he prefers to see people fighting, swearing and shouting at each other, than to see them just politely avoiding and pussyfooting around all of the important stuff because they don't want to offend anyone. That kind of of conflict is a sign of healthy society.
Right.
But I think that the other thing it does, as well as nudging people towards being more civil, is it nudges you towards being more personal.
Sure.
When you are when you're on the platform, you have this feeling of it's not privacy because you obviously know that this is public. Everybody will be able to read your letters and share your letters and comment upon them elsewhere on Twitter and Facebook. But there's a certain sense of intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
like the intimacy I feel right now. So I know you're going to post this,
Mm-hmm.
but nevertheless, I feel quite differently sitting here in my bedroom talking to you than I would do if there was if we were on stage with some big audience listening at the same time.
Sure.
And that sensation when you're on letter and you're writing and you don't see the rest of the screen, you don't have some kind of pop-up notifications telling you that people liked and commented and quoted.
Mm-hmm.
You're just in your space with your own letter and reading the other person's letter. And it really nudges people towards intimacy. And I see that happening in a couple of ways. One is that even when people are talking about their political views,
Yeah.
rather than just stating them as if they were just fact, like um, this is how abortion laws should be. Um, it I find that many people, most people on the platform, unprompted, are doing what I'm calling it a kind of epistemological mini memoir. They are not only saying what they um, what they support politically, what their stances are, but why. So they're saying, well, the reason that I feel this way about abortion law is because of these conversations I've had and these experiences I've had and these personal things that have happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And um, it makes it much easier to empathize with each other and to find common ground if you understand not just what the person thinks, but how they came to think that. It makes you a lot more sympathetic. So I think that is really valuable for political discourse.
Mm-hmm.
And the other side of that is that it's possible to have some very deeply personal exploratory conversations on letter,
Sure.
and people are willing to open up and um, be more vulnerable, um, be more personal in a way that I don't see them often doing on Twitter or on even on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is very, very valuable. So the kinds of conversations that I think people before had have always had with each other in email or in private messages. People seem to be willing to have some of those conversations publicly on the platform, and I think it's extremely helpful.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that, that it's more so helpful than not. And I think it really speaks to a need that we've all been having for the last decade and a half or so since social media has become extremely popular. And, you know, people describe it as a loneliness epidemic in the West, in Western countries, where more and more people feel like they're disconnected, even though we have all of these instantaneous ways of connecting. It seems like more and more of us feel isolated because now we are engaging in our political tribes and our social tribes, and we're just kind of we're on Twitter with thousands of followers, but we feel like only three people get us. So we don't really have a home. But if you actually have this deep, intimate conversation where you can talk about your personal experience and your lived experience in a letter exchange, you might not feel as lonely.
I think that's definitely true, and yeah, I think that's definitely true. I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Good. I'm glad we're in agreement.
Um, I mean, one other thing about it, I think, is the amount of effort it takes, the kind of threshold of difficulty,
Yeah.
is set just about correctly, I would say. So it's not like writing an article, and I try to encourage people to write spontaneously straight into
Hmm.
thoughts. So don't write a draft in Word or something beforehand and try to
Right.
organize it. I mean, you can if you want. It depends on what topic you are tackling and how you want to go about tackling it. And we do have some philosophers on the platform who are like, okay, this is my hypothesis.
Yeah.
Let me lay it out point one, point two, point three, point four. Let me define the terms. But most of the letters are not like that. And I, I, I think that it helps you to flex the writing muscle because you don't have to marshal all of your arguments at once, organize them all into a beautiful, coherent thesis and put it out in an article. You can think aloud with another person, get feedback from them, work things out as you go along. And that also encourages less dogmatism and more openness, this
Mm-hmm.
just this approach. But it's not completely effortless. So the thing about Facebook in particular, I find, so I personally use Facebook by about maybe every couple of months. I write a long and very personal status. I have a kind of policy of maximum openness. I think most people probably not be quite very comfortable with this level of openness, but
Mm-hmm.
I filter the feed to people who are my close friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I use it like a letter to my close friends, in a sense,
Yeah.
an letter. Um, and I write in quite a lot of detail and as openly and frankly and personally as possible
Mm-hmm.
what's going on with me. And I do get some people commenting in a very thoughtful way, but most people who are reading it just heart. And I feel that um, I want to communicate, send this out to them anyway, but there is a real discrepancy on Facebook between the effort put into creating a post and the effort
Mm-hmm.
put into responding.
Sure.
There's this asymmetry that you are pouring your heart out and then somebody like presses a heart button and you have no idea what that means. And it's a gesture
Mm-hmm.
of 1 second. Um, Whereas when you write to somebody and they reply, there is enough effort there that you feel it's like a little bit of a gift of their attention and time that they have given you. It
Sure.
feels much more equal. Um, and I think that's a real strength of the platform.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Humans have mammals have a need for reciprocity, and the problem with Twitter and Facebook and even Instagram is there's almost no reciprocity. You can't kind of respond in kind. Now, if you write a two-page letter on Letter Wiki, you're probably more likely to write a two-page letter in response to that so that you can match both volume and depth of content, etc. So it's a great platform in the sense that it allows people to have like real reciprocity in communication with people and transparency with people. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, absolutely. And although we haven't prompted people to do this, and I have written a guide for writers, so um, I've written a little guide for people who are kind of stuck and aren't sure where to start.
Okay.
But um, but in general, we haven't really prompted people. But nevertheless, unprompted, I found that people mirror each other's tone. They mirror each other's length of letter,
Sure.
and they it's quite intuitive, um, and it's really what you give to the person on letter you tend to get back. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there are a few letters that go unanswered, but we encourage people to get consent first because we want the maximum number of letters to be answered. We don't want the
Sure.
platform to be littered with unanswered missives. The idea is the dialogue. So you write because you want you don't just want to say something to somebody vaguely. You want to say this specific thing to this specific person, and you have a reason why you want to tell that person, and you person's response.
Right.
That's an audience, which is very helpful for formulating your thoughts, and is a very helpful discipline also if you're having a more polemical discussion. You can't do the thing that people always do on Twitter where they just generalize and they're like, oh, these Trump supporters, my friend Ali Rizvi always refers to them as Trumpanzees, or these libtards, or these whatever it might be. You can't do that because you're writing to a specific individual, a real person. So you try to understand where they're coming from, and you have to meet them at least part of the way.
Right. Yeah. I think having to personalize and make it real, that it's a real person. I think just the pure fact of it not being a process where they can automatically respond, you have to engage critical thinking. You have to engage impulse control, right? You can't just send a 2-word letter. I mean, no one's going to do that, right? It's not how the platform works. It's not what people do. So it's not going to.
Yeah, we do have a minimum word count
Right.
of 60 words. So
Right.
you can't fire off one little paragraph and then be answered. And I am using the platform also for writer interviews. And I always tell them, because they're very busy, if you want to just answer with one short paragraph, you can. You don't have to answer at the same length that I write to you. But it still seems that everybody answers, almost everyone, 90% of people answer very close to and just under the word limit that we set, which is interesting.
Really?
There's a kind of feeling that the length that people write to you at is the length you should respond at.
Yeah, that's reciprocity in a nutshell. Like, we expect in-kind response, always. Yeah. That's great. I mean, I think it's overall a very cool project, and it's got a lot of teeth, and it's going to go far. And hopefully it's going to help us with impulse control, not feeling as lonely, being more thoughtful, being more engaging with each other, being more charitable. I think, seeing each other's arguments in a light of charity is extremely important. I think you have to do that if you're actually reading a 2-page or a 3-page letter on Letter Wiki. If you read 1,000 words, you have to think at some point. You can't just automatically respond in that letter, right? So you have to be more charitable by nature.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that it's very useful that some conversations that have up until now been private can go into the public sphere, some more in-depth written conversations. So one thing that I feel it will have very fruitful educational uses. And we are developing an intranet, a private section for schools, because for under 18s there are legal issues with privacy, so we can't have them writing completely public letters, but we're going to create an inter-school system, and we're already using it in a couple of university courses.
Really?
Yeah, I took part over Skype today in a course at Wesleyan University up in Connecticut, in your part of the world.
Wow.
States, I mean. And they're using Letter Wiki in class, and there's also a philosophy professor at Rutgers who is using it in his class for assignments. So students are writing to each other, students are writing to the professor. In the case of the Wesleyan course, I'm having a lecture discussion with the professor about the subject of the course. So it's kind of fun for students to see two people with an academic background in the Enlightenment period talking about the themes that they are studying in their course.
Wow.
It gives you, it's a supplement to reading books and articles and things like that, because the problem with autodidacticism is that you don't get a chance to test your ideas, or to test the ideas that are in a particular book. So you open the book up, you read it, you feel completely convinced,
Yeah.
Walk around completely convinced. Then you
Yeah.
come across some other book that says the opposite, and you're
Mm.
like a kind of straw in the wind, blown hither and thither. And what Letter allows you to do is to see academics in real time having debates with each other.
Wow.
That is very clarifying. So the debate we were having between Massimo Pigliucci and David Sloan Wilson on extended evolutionary synthesis and group selection theory, for example, that's a really nice example of how that can work.
Wow.
We hope to really expand that side of things.
So you can talk about terribly intricate things with a lot of detail and clarity, as opposed to like a Twitter where you've got 280 characters to make maybe one of 7 points and make it usually rather poorly or rather sparsely, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay. So it doesn't seem like there's much of a downside. And just out of curiosity, how do you all handle like the problems of like hate speech and things of that nature? Like, how is someone monitoring to make sure that like nothing vitriolic is being said and things of that nature, or what's the deal there?
Right. So Jackson, my colleague Jackson Edwards, is one of his jobs is he reads every single letter um, that is posted on the platform,
Wow.
and in order to also um, recommend conversations to the rest of us for the featured feed, or for us to discuss and share on Twitter, or for me to write articles about, because I do some deep dive articles into topics that began as letter exchanges.
Okay.
Like most recently, the article I wrote about circumcision, which began as a letter exchange between Brian Earp, who is a medical ethicist,
Mm.
and Josh Uter, who is an Orthodox rabbi. So they had a discussion about circumcision on the platform, and I wrote an article which was a very in-depth look at the history, the medical implications, the ethics of neonatal circumcision in the US. And so Jackson keeps an eye out for those kinds of conversations in case we miss them, that would benefit from being boosted or having longer articles written about them. And he also just keeps an eye on what's going on. But so far, we have had no hate speech, and no one has written any hate mail on the platform as yet. And I, I think that our tactic is going to be to bury it if that happens. So I don't think we're going to throw people off the platform, but we just will place it in such a way that to be able to see that letter, you will have to search the person's specific name and find them. It won't be under anybody else's account or in the feed, or you'll be able to find it if you search hard enough, but it won't be public. I think that's going to be how we deal with it, but so far it has not arisen at all, and we've been taking the letters on a case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm.
We did have so we had have had a couple of extremely personal letters,
Mm-hmm.
and we've also had some letters that people didn't want to answer because they don't feel qualified to talk about the subject.
Oh.
So I had a guy who wanted me to have a long letter exchange with him about alternative energy sources and the climate crisis, and I
Oh.
do not feel qualified to have that exchange. And
Sure.
so I asked him to delete his letter to me and to resend it as a letter in a bottle. And now we're looking for a climate scientist who can talk to him, who will be qualified to have that letter exchange.
Can you restate what letter in a bottle is, just in case people are coming at this late?
Of course, yeah. So when you come onto our site, um, you can either write a letter to somebody who's already signed up, or sign up with a friend and write letters to each other. Or if you don't have anybody to write to, but you would like to exchange letters on a particular subject, you can write your first letter as a letter in a bottle. So when you go onto the homepage, you'll see one of the options. And when you will have the same letter writing screen, it will say Dear Letter in the Bottle, and you write your letter there. And then our epistolary matchmakers will read your letter and put out feelers and try to find somebody to begin an exchange with you.
Gotcha.
And actually, there are also already a few letters in bottles already there, just still waiting for partners. So if you're going to do that, you should also just take a quick look at the letters that are already unanswered and see if you want to actually answer one of those, if one of those suits the topic that you're discussing. But we will try to pair you up with somebody that you can write to. If you don't have anyone. So that's a letter in a bottle function. We've had one or two very private and personal letters, and I'm designated to answer those. So I'm actually doing a kind of unofficial agony aunt service on letters. So if you want to write about your very personal problems, which it might be difficult to think of who you would write to, then you can actually write to me. I will respond to very personal stuff.
Interesting.
I'm not qualified, so I give all necessary disclaimers. But I'm just, if you want to write about that, I'm happy to write about it. So, and I've had a couple of those letters, one of which I answered last night, which I think you might have seen with this person called Nick Camo, and we're talking about age gap relationships.
Interesting. Okay, so there's multiple reasons to use the platform. You can have a conversation, a long-form conversation with a friend. You can have a random idea and create a letter in a bottle, and just hopefully it gets matched up with someone. You can talk about personal issues, and they can even talk to you about those things. That's a lot. That's a lot to deal with. Okay, so it's a really robust platform, and it's really designed to kind of have a deeper, more intimate way of looking at any particular topic that you're interested in. That's impressive.
One other thing that we're going to revive, a feature we're going to revive, which is the karma section. And in that section, you can write to people who have died. You can write kind of thank you letters to people who have inspired you or meant a lot to you.
Wow.
So this is something that the Rathbone brothers actually used to run a little platform like that, and they had people writing to authors and also people writing on Father's Day. They had a slew of people writing to their fathers about their relationships with them, and
Wow.
we are thinking of reinstituting a Karma Wiki corner.
Wow.
For letters of gratitude.
Wow. That's great. So there's just so much going on at this platform. I mean, what's next for you all? If you're already doing so much, well, like what else could you be doing?
I think we just hope to get more people on board and have more types of conversations happening. I personally want to model every kind of use case, say in the business. I feel that it's an extremely flexible medium. And you can write about whatever you like. I think we will probably have a feature whereby the person will need to click something to explicitly agree. At the moment, we just tell people to get consent, but we'll probably have some feature where you have to give your agreement to receiving the letter.
Sure.
Because we don't want public figures on the platform to just have an accumulation of unanswered letters in their mailbox. Every letter should be a wanted letter, like every dog should be a wanted dog.
Fair enough.
And that's what we're doing at the moment. So um, we are currently applying for major funding. We've been shortlisted for major funding because we want to keep the platform definitely free. Advertising free. We're not attempting to make money directly from Letter. It's a service we're giving to the world, and we are persuading people that this is something that they would like to have. They would like to exist out there.
Wow.
And I think it has the potential to have a really wonderful impact on public discourse, the public square, on education, and on connection and communication between people.
Can you think of a way that Letter might not be useful?
So let me think.
Just to give two sides of
Yeah,
the
sure.
platform, because there's a lot that's great, but
Well, sometimes you really want to have a much more. First of all, some conversations are easier to have spoken rather than written,
sure.
and and people often enjoy listening to things rather than reading because you can
Sure.
listen while you're in the car or doing other things. We have created a little SoundCloud site where we've recorded some of the lectures. A
Really?
few of them. This is kind of in beta, but we are planning to have a little kind of accompanying podcast where some of the lecture exchanges are read. But at the moment, they're all just written.
Mm.
And I think that it's nice to be able to. I listen to podcasts a lot when I'm working out or going for a long walk and stuff like that, and it's wonderful to be able to do that. The other thing is that you can't have a scrum. You can't have a kind of discussion with more than two people, and sometimes it's really helpful to have a whole panel there or to have a group of people throwing an idea around. Literature is not useful for that. Also, um, the thing about, so we can help a little bit with a serendipity by matchmaking, but one of the great things about Twitter is this serendipitous factor. And I have found that for all its faults, Twitter has some really huge strengths in that way. For example, 3 years ago, when I went to 4 years ago now, when I went to live in India for a few years, um, I had I grew up in Pakistan, and I had never even been permitted to go to India for that reason before. And my status has changed now. My Indian visa status has changed, but I had never been to India. I have no family there. I knew nobody there at all. And I was planning to stay for a long time. And all my friends in India, all my initial circle of friends, and almost all my friends in India, and I had a very vibrant, very wonderful circle of friends. I met, quote unquote, on Twitter and on Facebook.
I see.
Almost all of them. I think one or two of them were the others were the friends of people I met on Twitter and Facebook. And for example, I was there in Bombay, and I was staying initially at this Dharamsala, a hostel. It was a maximum stay period, and I had a place that I could move into, but not for a few months. And I posted this on Twitter and I posted it on Facebook. And first of all, somebody on Twitter who wasn't even, it was an anonymous person with an anonymous handle. I couldn't even see the face, the name, nothing. I think we had never interacted, but she was a follower of mine. She wrote and said, let's meet for lunch first so we can kind of see each other, and then you can come and stay at our house.
Wow.
I met her for lunch, and it was really lovely. And she
Wow.
said, okay, let's go back to the hostel, get your things, and you're coming home with us.
Wow.
And I went to stay with her and her sister. And I stayed there for 10 days. And in the meantime, in that 10 days, and a friend of theirs invited me to go and stay with him. And I actually stayed with him for the entire remainder of the months until I could move
Wow.
into my place in Bombay. So that was, and those were people I had not met before, didn't know at all. It was completely through social media. And I have made a lot of friends. I also, all of my work that I do, I was hired because people followed me on Twitter and found my writing through Twitter. I also use Twitter to invite people on my podcast. I met you through Twitter.
True.
I've made many real life friends through Twitter. I make a point of whenever I'm in a new city, I meet everyone I know from Twitter in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a kind of group Twitter meetup.
Mm-hmm.
So um, Twitter and Facebook, Facebook is helpful for keeping in touch with a large group of your friends. If you have a lot of friends who are distant or live abroad, you can keep in touch with them all at once through Facebook by posting your news, like I do every couple of months, posting your photos, keeping them updated. And Twitter is useful for making new friends. But what Letter is for is having these kinds of in-depth reciprocal conversations, and also for these kinds of public intellectual written exchanges. So the kind of thing we would love to see happening more is um, some academic in Japan is talking to an academic in the States, and they're using Letter as the medium. Rather than emailing each other or just talking at a closed conference, they're using Letter so everybody has access to that conversation.
Yeah, and what I've noticed is it's not just academics on Letter. There are quite a few different kinds of people from different kinds of professions. I've seen journalists on Letter, I've seen philosophers, I've seen real academics, I've seen fake academics like myself. I've seen all sorts of different kinds of people on Letter, and it's awesome to see regular people, academics, construction work. I mean, I've literally seen every kind of person on Letter who's just interested in having real conversation, because it seems like we're all starved for real conversation,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's phenomenal, you know,
Yeah, the
I
range
do.
is extraordinary. The range of things that are going on there on Lecture.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I literally have seen every kind of person on Letter, you
And
know.
every kind of conversation is happening.
Yeah.
Um,
It's amazing. It's awesome. So, it's really exciting. I'm glad that Letter's out there. I appreciate all that you do and all that Clyde and Dane and your colleagues are doing to help conversation become more civil again and kind of get rid of this automatic dopamine response driven way of conversing about serious topics on Twitter, because we clearly get nowhere. In fact, we usually make things worse when we debate on Twitter. So, this is a great, great tool, I think, to deal with a lot of the problems that we see on other social media platforms. It's a good fix, it seems like.
mm. Yes, we've already had actually two conversations between people who had fought on Twitter and
Ah,
blocked each other and are now kind of like writing to each other on Letter. It seems to be a very healing space
good.
in a sense. And people are discussing um, uh, very inflammatory and delicate topics. So
Yeah.
people are talking about guns, they're talking about abortion, they're talking about race, and people from completely different sides of the ends of the political spectrum are talking to each other on the platform.
Yeah. It's astounding the different kinds of conversations, the different kinds of people initiating conversations. And I think it's extremely valuable given the state of affairs in the educated online world where everyone's sniping at each other all the time. So this is such a cool thing. So glad that you were able to come talk about this today, and I really appreciate your time. Is there anything that you want to remind people of? Make sure you definitely let us know all of your handles and how we can get a hold of you and all of your Patreon and all that stuff.
Sure, I would just say that if you uh, If you want to write and you don't know where to start, I have a guide which I think would be helpful. And if you don't know who to write to, then please feel free to ask us. And if you tag me, or you can also email us at humans@karma.wiki. Um, if you email us or tag us, we will respond and we'll help you, talk you through the process, and try to get you set up. So don't feel too daunted. Um, Reach out to us if you need us. And yeah.
And then where can people find you?
So I specifically, you can follow me on Twitter at Iona Italia. And I also have I have an author page at Ario Magazine. So if you look for my name, Iona Italian Ario, Areo. Um, if you look for the Two for Tea podcast, if you look for my name in the Two for Tea podcast, you will find that. You can subscribe to that podcast at all the various, all reputable podcast apps, and maybe some disreputable ones as well. And I have actually several blogs and other places where my writing is online, and I have two books, published books. One is a study of Enlightenment thought. It's called Anxious Employment, and the other one is about dance. It's called Our Tango World. And if you just generally would like to support my work, because my work is very dependent on Patreon support, the best way to do that is to support the podcast. So money from the podcast page, Patreon goes directly to me. That's 2for T/Patreon, Patreon/2for T.
Right on. So Patreon/2for T. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy, you've got lots of things to do, and you're in high demand. So thanks so much for your time and for taking all this time to really explain what Letter Wiki is doing, the future of discourse in the online world, which I think, you know, the Reddits of the world, the Twitters of the world are probably going to go by the wayside a little bit here, and we'll probably be much more interested in real conversation, which Letter does brilliantly, I think. So thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure.
And we will chat again very soon, okay?
Yes.
All
Thank you
right.
so much, Patrick.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.